Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing you all another episode of quick movie reviews, and as always with this series I will talk about several different movies that have various degrees of recency in terms of when they were released, and I will give my thoughts on them. I will try to be as quick as I possibly can, but if I have more to say on a particular movie, then I will go ahead and do so. But today we have 7 movies on the docket, so let's not waste any more time and get started with the first movie I will be discussing. And first on the list is a Netflix original that got huge virality, not only on Netflix, but also in the music charts and on social media in general. And maybe that has something to do with the crazy title, as well as the music that was bound to do well, and that is K-Pop Demon Hunters. Yeah, talk about a very interesting title, and I'll admit I wasn't expecting much going into this movie just because of the silliness of the title alone, but the animation did look interesting to me, and I was intrigued to see what all the hype was about, so I checked it out. I have to say that overall, I get the hype, even if I don't think I love this as much as other people do. I do think it's a pretty good twist on the story of someone who is holding a secret and they become a sort of liar reveal trope, but in this case, the liar reveal story is much more interesting because of what it means in context of the movie's world. So this movie revolves around a K-pop girl group, a trio, who when they are not singing in front of an adoring crowd, are trying to keep the demons at bay that are trying to take the souls of the people that they are trying to protect. And they have been successful at it so far, but they soon realize that this new boy band that's coming around is actually a group of demons, though the people around them don't seem to realize it. Our main character Rumi actually forms a relationship with the main Saja boy band member, and they sort of bond together over a secret that Rumi has been hiding, which is that she is part demon herself. Even though she hunts demons, her father was actually a demon. I do appreciate how complex the movie is trying to be plot-wise, although I do think this leads to some noticeable flaws that I'll talk about in a second. First of all, I did like the central twist that Rumi, the main character, had demon blood in her. I think that added an interesting element to this movie that made it have a far more interesting concept than what I was initially expecting. I appreciated that that was the driving force of the plot and the decisions that Rumi was making, and it makes her an interesting main character. I do think it helps that our main characters are overall very charming, although I do think the characters we know the most about are Rumi and Jinu. I don't really think they develop many of the other characters much besides them two, but I do think that generally works okay for the plot, because they are the two most important, and I do understand they need to develop their voices the most, and if they had tried to develop the other characters they'd had in a relatively short runtime, I think it would have left Rumi's story a little bit to the wayside. I do like both Mira and Zoe, her two friends. I think they're both very fun, even if they are maybe a little bit of stereotypical character archetypes you've seen before. I do generally like both of them. I think I like Mira in particular. I really like what she brings to the table. All the voice actors are very good and bring about very emotional performances, and yeah, I generally appreciate what is being brought to the department in the acting and the character development. The animation is awesome in this. I don't really have many complaints about it. It is using this animation style that has become very popular, where it's this more comic booky type, combined with some more classical 3D animation, and I think it works very well. The character designs are pretty charming, especially for our 3 main girls. I do think the Saja boys are animated a bit more generically to a little bit badly, sadly. There's a couple in the background that didn't work for me as well because of how ridiculous they looked, but at the same time, they are demons, so maybe it makes a little bit of sense. Now, as far as the music goes, I have a bit more of a complicated feeling on that. Now, I totally get why the music for this popped off on the Hot 100. I think it works well for that scene, and it's understandable why songs like Golden and How It's Done have been so popular on the Hot 100. They have that pop accessibility to them, and the fact that this is a K-pop group and K-pop fans are just some of the most dedicated out there, it's not too surprising that this happened. But the music on this just doesn't entirely work for me. I think some of it is a little bit awkward in the structure of a musical. I get this is a pop musical, so it is definitely playing into that genre, but there are just some songs on here production-wise that play it a little bit too over the top for me, or just aren't very pleasant to listen to. How It's Done is definitely one of those where I just don't really care for it that much. But I do also think there are some positive songs on here. I do like Golden, and if it stays on the Billboard Hot 100, I think it could be one of my favorite hit songs of the year. I do think this movie works overall. I do think it's very good. I really did enjoy it. And yeah, it was a surprising one. I have to say, I didn't expect what I got out of it, but I appreciated its very complex narrative, even if the narrative sometimes had some confusing things to say about the demons, because it tried to humanize some of the demons, but then others it was like, yeah, we need to kill them. So that made things a little bit complicated, and I wasn't sure where to land on that. But I did still enjoy what this movie had to offer and would generally recommend it. Solid 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. Next up, I'm going to be talking about F1 from Top Gun director Joseph Kosinski. This is a follow-up to it, and many are saying that this movie is set in the same universe as Top Gun, which I can sort of see because they both have very similar directing and shot styles to them. But the thing is, I do think Top Gun is much better and much stronger than F1 is. Now, I'll admit part of this comes from the fact that I have never been that into F1 or any type of car racing in the first place. Now, from the racing standpoint, this movie is actually quite impressive. I think it has some very impressive racing scenes that feel visceral and really in the moment. You really feel like you're right there with the racers when it's happening. I found those to be very impressive, comparable to the dogfighting scenes that they did in Top Gun, shot in a very similar way where it feels very visceral and very lifelike. So I did really appreciate the racing scenes. I think they were actually the best parts of this movie, and definitely the parts where I was getting the most excited, or the most devastated, depending on what was happening in the movie. I found the characters in this to be fine for what they were, if a little bit generic. We've got characters who are definitely characters that you have seen in these sports types of movies, almost to a T in many others. Main character Sonny Hayes, played by Brad Pitt, is the disenchanted old-timer who has been racing for years and is just sort of cynical about the whole thing. And then you've got the arrogant rookie, played by Desmond Idris, named Joshua Pierce, who is very full and sure of himself and does not like when the old-timer comes in to just basically rain on his parade, and the two clash, but over the course of time, of course, learn to respect each other and what each other has to offer in experience versus age and everything like that. So it is very much so a sort of tried and true plot arc of just this sort of ragtag team coming together to get a win for this big championship. It creates an inspiring narrative that is nice to watch, and I do like that they take some of the cliches and actually upend them a little bit, especially with how they do the mentor-mentee narrative. I think there are places, especially near the end, where it takes some interesting routes that I wasn't expecting, and I did appreciate. But at the same time, I don't know if it does enough to make it stand out necessarily. It's not as good as the mentor narrative they had going on in Top Gun Maverick, for sure. That one was far more interesting and more compellingly developed. The one here feels like sort of stock a bit. Like I said, it's well shot, the racing sequences are excellently executed, and yeah, I think the characters are fine. I think the performances are generally good too. I did like Brad Pitt as Sonny. Even if he is playing himself, he is generally charming. Javier Bardem is probably the best part of this movie as Ruben. He really did disappear into this character, and I really liked where they took him. And I also thought Carrie Condon was excellent as Kate, even if I do think the chemistry between her and Sonny was a little bit forced and a little bit unneeded. I think Desmond Idris was also really good as Joshua Pierce. I actually preferred his performance over Brad Pitt's as far as the two leads go. he really does a good job at playing the arrogant rookie and making him more complex than you might expect. I did like what he brought to the table. But like I said, yeah, this movie is a little bit stock, a little bit generic in places. And I do think it runs a little bit too long as well. I do think that, especially as it goes to the end, there are several places where it could have ended, but it just keeps going. And it gets to a point where you're just sort of waiting for the movie to end. At least I was. Some people may have liked it going on longer. But I still did have a good time with this movie. I still did like what it brought to the table and found it to be a generally fun experience, which was way more than I was expecting. Strong 3 out of 5 stars for me. Next up, I'll be discussing the newest in the 28 series, 28 Years Later. Now, I'm probably going to have a bit of a controversial take on the 28 series because I'm actually not a huge fan of the first two. Now, I will admit, this year was the first time I'd ever watched them, so maybe I'm coming off of not really understanding why they were iconic for their time. And I get why they were important, particularly 28 Days Later was very important for the zombie genre, a huge landmark in the time when it was released. It inspired the likes of series like The Walking Dead, so they're obviously very important. I don't think either of them are bad movies, but both of them make choices that I just didn't love, particularly in the filming style, especially when the zombies came along. The shaky cam was not something that I really loved, and I didn't find the characters to be particularly interesting in either movie. Although they weren't bad, I didn't find them to be super interesting. But, like I said, I didn't hate either of the movies. So I wasn't necessarily having high expectations of 28 Years Later, so color me shocked that I came out of this movie absolutely loving it and thinking that it is easily the best out of the three. That may be a controversial opinion as well, because I've seen that some people are not a big fan of this one, but I really liked this movie. I thought it was great and easily the best of the series, and I think brings it to a promising new direction that I appreciated. I liked the more sensitive tone that this one took and the more heartfelt tone that it took, especially in its second half with the relationship with Spike with his mother Isla. I like the characters in this one easily the best of any of the 28 movies. I think that Spike is a great main character, very sympathetic, and I loved the journey that he went on, particularly so because of how well Alfie Williams played this character. It is amazing that this is his first big role. He really just knocks it out of the park here with a superb performance. Jodie Comer was emotionally just excellent as Hila. I really loved what she was doing with this character, and it made her character very heartbreaking to watch, but one that you got really attached to. I also really liked Aaron Taylor-Johnson as Jamie, even if he was in the movie for less time than I would have liked. I liked what he brought to the table, and he played this character that could have come across as very unlikable in a much more nuanced way, which I did appreciate. It took some pretty big risks, especially in the second half, but I did appreciate them. I also have to give a huge shout out to Ralph Fiennes. He was awesome in this as the Doctor. And yeah, where they take the Doctor character is not what you're going to see coming, but I did appreciate where they took him nevertheless, and it was excellently done. This movie is beautifully shot as well, I should say that, especially this night scene where Spike and his dad are going across the water back to their homeland. It is just starkly beautiful, but also terrifying in a very interesting way. If there were any flaws I would have to give about this movie, I do think that the ending scene comes a little bit out of nowhere. Now, I don't think it's actually as terrible as some people do. Some people seem to think that it is a ending that totally shatters the rest of the movie and makes the rest of the movie worse by comparison, but I'm not sure I agree. I think it actually works better for the movie that it comes at the end, and instead of interrupting the movie in the middle or something like that. And I thought it was a good payoff to something that was established at the beginning of the movie as well. But that would be one critique, is that it was a little sudden, even if I don't think it's as bad as some people do. And there are a couple of places where I think the plot could have moved forward a little bit quicker than what it was doing, because some things were just repeating over and over, but I still do think this is a pretty great movie. I was very pleasantly surprised by this one. I didn't expect to say that this would be one of my favorite movies of the year, but it has potential to be. I really liked this a lot, and If you like zombie movies, then I think you'll have a pretty great time here. This is getting a strong 4 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is a spin-off in the John Wick series, Ballerina. I was very excited for this movie, especially hearing that Ana de Armas, one of my favorite actresses, was going to be playing the lead. And yeah, I mean, I'm always excited for something in the John Wick world, and I had a great time with this movie. There's actually not too much to say about it. If you've seen a John Wick movie, then you're going to generally appreciate this, although I do think it goes without saying that this is definitely a lesser version of the John Wick movies. And this movie does have an unfortunate disadvantage of coming after John Wick Chapter 4, which is one of the best action movies of all time. But I did still generally enjoy this one. I do think its first half is sort of lackluster. I didn't really find Ana de Armas's character to be that interesting. I mean, Eva's fine, but she's not as interesting as John Wick. I just didn't find her trying to discover her heritage that interesting, and the twist that they pull in the end with her parentage and her lineage is not as interesting as I think the movie was trying to make it be. And I will admit, this movie didn't really go off until the second half. It has this Resident Evil Village type sequence in it that really works well and was very impressive, and maybe one of my favorite sequences in any of the John Wick movies in general that really did bump this movie up. Otherwise, it would have probably been a little bit generic to me, but I do think the ending half saved it, especially when John Wick comes in and starts hunting after Eve, and they create a very interesting repertoire between the two of them. But yeah, there's not much to say about this movie. It's a good action flick, but it's not one that's going to blow your mind. 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is a sequel to Megan, Megan 2.0. If you're a longtime subscriber, you might remember when I reviewed Megan, and I thought it was a generally fine movie, though not necessarily anything remarkable in the killer doll genre, but I thought it was fine for what it was, and if anything, this movie makes me appreciate the first one all the more because, wow, what happened here? This movie is clearly trying to pull a Terminator 2 or an Aliens, where it is changing the genre of the movie to be something else, and from horror to action, and make the main character who was a villain before a good guy, which is definitely more inspired by Terminator 2. But I just have to say, in this movie, it just doesn't work. I don't think Megan is an interesting enough character to change her personality. And I don't know, I think it just might be because of the disinvested way that Amy Donald is voicing Megan. She just doesn't sound like she ever cares in this movie. I found the messaging in this movie about AI in particular to be very confusing. I almost feel like the movie is portraying the villains in this movie as those who want AI to be gone entirely. I mean, that seems to be the case because of who they revealed the villain to be, which is unfortunately sort of fitting given that the director of Blumhouse seems to be wanting to bring AI into movies. So it's not too surprising that he makes the villain of this someone who doesn't want AI to be a part of our lives, even though I think that is a valid thing to be worried about. But at the same time, the way this villain goes about executing his plan is absolutely ridiculous. It just makes no sense at all. It moves so quickly that it doesn't even give you time to think about how stupid everything is, but it really is just a very dumb movie from front to back. Now, if you're someone who likes dumb fun, maybe you'll enjoy this, but I didn't even find it to be particularly fun. I just found it to be dumb. I also just did not care for the characters here, whereas I did like Gemma fine enough in the first movie and thought Allison Williams put on a good performance of her. Gemma became a very frustrating character in this one. She accepted rebuilding Megan very quickly. I understand that that had to happen for the plot, but it felt like it happened way too fast, and her worries for rebuilding Megan were totally valid, so it's very silly that the other characters around her, even her own niece, Katie, who knows how dangerous Megan was, it just doesn't make sense why that anyone would want to rebuild Megan, even in terms of the other threat that is going on, which is a new AI that is terrorizing the rest of the world. And the new AI, I do find the new AI to actually be one of the only highlights of the movie. That's about one of the only positives I have. This movie is trying to be so many things at once that it comes across as the biggest possible mess. I didn't care for it as an action movie. The action was underwhelming. Anytime it attempted to bring a little bit of horror back, it wasn't scary. The acting was generally bad. I don't really want to hold anything against the child actor Violet McGraw as Katie, because I think the script didn't afford her much time to be compelling, but nevertheless, it wasn't a very compelling performance. Brian Jordan Alvarez is trying to bring some levity and comedy here as Cole, but once again, I don't think the script gives him enough to do. This is just generally a pretty bad movie that I would not recommend. Definitely one of my least favorite movies of the year. 2 out of 5 stars. Next up is one of my most anticipated movies of the year in Life of Chuck, which is the first time in a while we've seen director Mike Flanagan go to the big screen. He has mainly been working on TV shows for Netflix, most of which are pretty great to straight-up masterpieces, so I was very excited to see him go back to the big screen, especially with a movie that was not going to be a horror movie, but instead one of Stephen King's dramas, about the life of a man who lived a seemingly simple life, but nevertheless one that is meant to be altogether beautiful because of how he affects people's lives along the way in positive ways. And yeah, I have to unfortunately say that this wasn't quite as good as I was hoping it to be. There are definitely some very strong moments in this, but I feel like it's a little bit overwrought for its own good. Now, is it a bad movie? No, I wouldn't say so, and I do think it has a genuine heart at the center of it, but I do think it's lost a little bit, especially under all the overwriting done here. Now, if you know Mike Flanagan, you know he is someone who loves to include monologuing and a lot of just big line deliveries about life in general. And while I do generally find this to be a charm of him, it doesn't really work in context of this movie, where, I don't know, I think the movie could afford a little bit more subtlety, especially in its ending moments. I do think the performances are generally pretty good to great. I love the kid who plays the younger Chuck. Not the youngest, but the middle school age Chuck. He is definitely the best part of this movie. I thought he put on an excellent performance and really makes you care for this character and like him and understand why the movie is about him. I also thought Mark Hamill was superb as Chuck's grandfather, Albie. He was awesome in this and really makes this character that could be unlikable in certain contexts pretty nuanced. I really appreciated what they did with him. I wish the movie had used Tom Hiddleston more. The trailers were a little deceptive in that Tom Hiddleston actually isn't in the movie that much. I think that the structure of this movie can work to its benefit and to its detriment. The movie goes in sort of a backwards or not chronological order, I guess would be the best way to describe it. The movie starts actually at the end of Chuck's life, and it shows this in a very metaphorical way that could be interesting and I think is a cool idea, but as you discover why it's shown this way, it becomes a little bit more flawed in my opinion. And then it goes back to Chuck as a grown adult and this experience he had where he danced with this girl who was down on her luck and this drummer girl who was trying to earn money but hadn't been able to, and he changes both of their lives for the better. And then it goes back to him in middle school and how he started his love for dancing and the relationship he had with those closest to him, and then ends off with him a little bit older in high school and having a very life-changing experience that makes him basically affect the rest of his life in a much different way. And yeah, I am okay with the structure of this movie. I do think it's interesting how they reveal different things about Chuck because of this, and it makes certain things have more impact at the beginning of the movie because of how they're revealed at the end, but makes other things more perplexing because of how they were revealed. I also do think that this movie thematically is maybe a little bit in your face about it. I would say almost too in your face. They basically outright state the theme to you, and it's a little bit annoying to me because Mike Flanagan usually isn't that over the top about it. I do still generally enjoy some things about this. I think the cast really carries this, and I do think there are some strong visual moments as well. And I do think the ending of this movie has a haunting poignancy to it that I liked. I just wish it had been a little bit more subtle. 3 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, let's end off with a movie where I have very little to say because it is pretty straightforward what I like and don't like about it, and that is the Karate Kid Legends movie. This is coming after the major popularity of the Cobra Kai TV series, which I generally did really like, even if it did have some very, very obvious flaws to it. It was overall a very charming series, so it wasn't too surprising because of how successful it was that they made a movie. Although, if you're expecting this movie to have any relevance to Cobra Kai, you're going to be disappointed. There's only one part of it that has a little bit of a connection, and even that connection is very subtle at best. This movie is about a totally different character, a totally different main character, named Lee Fong, who is basically the new Daniel LaRusso, although he does have more fighting experience than Daniel did in the first Karate Kid. But his experience is in Kung Fu, not karate, because he was born in China and was trained under Mr. Han, who is actually from the Karate Kid remake that starred Jaden Smith. So it's sort of cool to see this crossover of two different Karate Kid worlds, the one with Mr. Han in it and the one with Daniel LaRusso, and canonically putting them both in the same universe. I think it's actually a pretty fun idea. Unfortunately, they don't do as much with this idea as I wish they would have. Daniel doesn't appear in the movie until about halfway, maybe even over halfway through it, so we don't really get to see much from him, and I don't really see the relationship that he forms with Lee Fong to be anything particularly compelling. Lee Fong is a lot closer to Mr. Han, and Mr. Han is a much more interesting character and more funny character here, played charmingly well by Jackie Chan. I do like Ben Wang as Lee Fong. I think he has potential here, and I like the more mature portrayal he gives. It's a different take on a Karate Kid, but I appreciate that it is different. I also thought Joshua Jackson was generally fine as Victor, although his story felt like a weird one to put as a focus for the first half of the movie. I understand how it was developing Lee Fong's character, but it just felt a little out of nowhere. Sadie Stanley was also fine as the love interest of Lee Fong, although I found her to be a bit generic. And generally, that's the feeling I got about most of this movie. It was following the template of Karate Kid pretty closely after the first half was over, and you could see where it was going, but at the same time, it was fun for what it was. I had a good time watching it. I just wouldn't say go in expecting anything super mind-blowing. 3 out of 5 stars for me. So yeah, that ends off this episode of Quick Movie Reviews. What were your thoughts on any of the movies I discussed? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you on the next video.